by the way, the initial ransomware appeared, I think, more than 35 years ago, close to 1990. In a short, ransomware is I get access to some of your belongings, which could be different depending on either you're a consumer or a business, but I block access for you for that assets.
There's a few groups out there that are targets of opportunity, and once they find that one piece of technology that they can exploit on a very large scale, that's what they go after and focus.
Quantum computers are able to break asymmetric encryption, and that would mean that ransomware gangs their encryption wouldn't really work.
This extortion actually targets the image of that company more than the actual business damage.
All right, so welcome to a new episode of Cybercrime from the Frontline, where we have the experts in the room. A unique opportunity again. We're going to talk about one of the most popular attack forms today, which is ransomware. There's been a lot of talk around it. However, there's always new developments, and we have the right people here to bring up the latest news. I'm Dan Berte, your host, and with me today is Dragos, Sean, and Radu. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, and thank you, Dan, for inviting me here. So I'm Gavrilut Dragos. I'm the Vice President of Threat Research here in Bitdefender, and yeah, I do have to handle ransomware on an everyday basis. So yeah, happy to be here. Sean?
Hi, I'm Sean Nikkel. I'm the lead for the CTI team that supports Bitdefender MDR, with our biggest customer being the MDR SOC, but also lots of different customers from MDR and even internal. Ransomware has been super important because in our side of the business, we've seen, pretty steady uptick. So it's been pretty interesting the last couple of years in the ransomware world for sure.
Hi, my name is Radu. I'm a security researcher for Bitdefender Labs, and my specialties are forensics and cloud security.
So obviously we know that cybercrime is a conduit for profit, right? The motivation for most of it is, of course, money, and the most distilled form, the ideal form of grabbing money off of unsuspecting victims is obviously ransomware. And I don't believe there's anybody out in the world who doesn't know what ransomware is, but for the sake of it, let's revisit it. What is ransomware? How does it work? Who does it affect most, and how did it evolve over the last year since it showed up in the space?
In a short, ransomware is, I get access to some of your belongings, which could be different depending on either you're a consumer or a business, but I block access for you for that assets. Blocking could mean a lot of things, and I'm going to further explain this. But I will allow you access to those assets again, provided you pay me a fee of some sort. Okay. Now, by the way, the initial ransomware appeared, I think, more than 35 years ago, close to 1990. It was a simple one, but it wasn't feasible from the money perspective. So all they do was to scramble the name of your, of your files, which is, relatively simple to do, but you will not be able to know which file is what. So they could rescramble it again for a pay, but there hasn't been any way for me, for example, to pay something like this without this being monitored. The actual, let's say, ransomware revolution started when cryptocurrency started to become a thing. Because that was something that people was not able to monitor because of it. And by the way, the first type of ransomware was not the one that we know today. It was more like a screen locker. Now, a screen locker, as a general concept, will actually block the access to your computer, present you like a small image where it says you got locked out of your computer, you need to pay a fee for something. Now, this message per se doesn't carry any weight. You're going to get to, your IT guy that will help you probably. So what they did is link it to something taboo, like you're, going to a porn site. From that porn site you get infected, and the message will be, because you are caught, looking at porn or something like this, we lock your computer and we need you to pay a fee so that will not happen. Well, this is a little bit taboo because then you cannot actually go to your computer guy and say, hey, I was actually looking at porn when I got infected. Can you please help me with this? Later on, they started to link this with, police. So instead of, saying that you are caught looking at some porn, they said the police. And any kind of police from within the specific state caught you looking at the porn, you need to pay a fee, otherwise you face maybe jail, maybe some different penalties that carry a lot of weight in terms of financial. So something, and they always give you like a very small amount of time, like you have 24 hours to decide, otherwise it's done. Now obviously after a while people started to understand that all of this were a scam, and nobody actually was going to pay. That's one thing. The second one, the security industry started to present a lot of tools that can actually be used to, like a, live CD that you can just insert. Keep in mind that at that period, a CD was something that everybody could actually use. So a live CD that you can insert and will disinfect you. So they have to move to something else. And this is where the actual, let's say, ransomware appear, because they started to look into cryptography and how they can actually encrypt your files and, ask you for a ransom to decrypt them. Now, this also have some interesting stories because initially they used a simple encryption, a symmetric encryption, that they went to an asymmetric encryption, and maybe we can talk about this later in the show.
Was that because improvement in computing power?
Not necessarily. Maybe it was easier like this. Then they realized that it was also easier to break it, so they needed to switch to something else. From the mathematical standpoint of view, both were available at that point. It's easier to use a symmetric encryption. There are a lot of libraries out there that you can use, so there were some, let's say, minor advantages, and things started to progress. Now, at some point in time, they kind of made a switch from the consumer to a more, let's say, business environment. Why am I saying this? You don't always get so much money from a consumer. I mean, yeah, I can, reach your laptop, look on something I can encrypt. Usually will be photos or something that you and only you have with your family, and try to get some money out of it. But on a business side, if I find a database with customers or something that is truly valuable or something that is truly needed for your business, this is where I get the big bucks. So they started to move into targeted attacks against enterprise. Obviously, this started to work. The enterprises adjusted, started to do backups over and over, so they needed a new leverage. This is where an extortion mechanism appeared. It's called double extortion. The first extortion is considered when I'm telling you, hey, you need to pay for this amount of money. Now, what they started to do is before everything is encrypted, they also exfiltrate the data. So now I'm saying, hey, Dan, sorry, you got breached, but this is the data that I have stolen from you before I encrypted. If you pay, I'm going to provide you the password. I'm going to allow you to decrypt the data. You can use it, and I will delete the data that I have stolen from you. If you don't pay, not only that I will not provide you the password, but I will make the data public. And it's your decision if you want to pay. We also seen some interesting messages from ransomware gangs where they actually explain what is the penalty in this case. Like actually quoting for the GDPR, saying, hey, if you don't pay, this is exactly the amount of money you are going to pay if we do this. And even more in United States, there are some services where you can announce that somebody has been breached. And there are cases where, well, if you don't want to do this, then I'm going to announce on those services that you got breached, even if I'm the one that actually breached. Those were the second. Now, for some scenarios where this didn't happen, they actually added the third layer. So let's say, you have like a large company, let's say a phone company, you have like a list of, customers. I'm going to breach you, take the database, encrypt it. Okay, then I'm going to tell to you, hey, okay, I'm going to make the database public. I'm going to not provide you the decryption key. But then I look at the database and let's see that I find Sean there. And then I go to Sean and say, hey, Sean, you know what I just did? I just breached Dan. And not only that, if he doesn't pay, then not only that I'm going to make things public, but everything about you is going to be made public, and I'll make sure that it's going to be made public. So if you don't want this, you better tell Dan that he should pay. So this is kind of a different mechanism. It's the, you know, a double, triple extortion mechanism where it's not just me pushing you. The customers come and say, hey, I don't want my data to be public. Do something about it. And if you want like a prediction for the future, it's likely that at some point they are going to stop encrypting data. Mm-hmm. It's likely. Encrypting the data implies certain type of actions from our operating system that, you know, a security product might observe. It's more likely that they will actually transform and will not be a ransomware anymore, will be an extortionware. Yeah. Meaning that they are going to just exfiltrate the data and use this mechanism. And if you want my guess, right now they are testing how well extortion with all of this mechanism works, and if it's good enough so they don't actually need to, you know, encrypt or do anything there.
Because there's two ways that it can be sort of prevented and addressed. There's one way trying to prevent the attack itself that deploys the encryptor. And sometimes with lengthy investigations and research, the key might be retrieved, and
in some scenarios,
lockers in some scenarios might be made available by security professionals. But that's the ideal scenario, right? And I always find it interesting, looking really back in time, how attacks were destructive. And the validation was in a form of an ego boost of claiming the attack itself. And I always thought that ransomware moved away from that, but that's not true. Ransomware groups are still working on attribution, and they really want to be seen for the work that they do and make the money as well. So it's just still an evolution. It's not a different group of people or different kind of people. It's the same people that are just highly optimizing the attacks to their purpose, right?
Yeah, they're becoming, you know, over the last few years, definitely more tech savvy in a lot of ways, that, you know, they're able to leverage specific exploits. You know, like there's a few groups out there that are targets of opportunity, and once they find that one piece of technology that they can exploit on a very large scale, that's what they go after and focus. Kind of going back to Dragos' point about, you know, as far as kind of reporting stuff to third parties, a lot of them would start going to partners of, you know, victim companies, or going straight to the media, you know, and sort of using those different ways to leverage. There was a couple of groups that were experimenting with DDoS attacks where, you know, that got into like a quadruple extortion at that point. And so they're very flexible, and they're kind of willing to try different stuff. And, you know, we've seen things on the MDR side where some well-known ransomware groups that do the single and double extortion have been skipping, you know, the encryption step and going straight to exfil. You know, once they've been discovered, it's like they're very quick to move to kind of like the smash and grab of, okay, I've been discovered, I'm getting as much stuff as I can, I'm getting out of there, you know. And so you're already starting to see those tactics change, and it's interesting just in the last couple of years how it's evolved and continues.
Yeah, we might even rename the episode from ransomware to extortionware, because it's actually where we're at right now. So I was wondering, Radu, how it looks from your side in the labs when we're looking at the progress and the research on these things.
Over the past few years, we've seen, like, getting a bit technical into things, we've seen changes from how the ransomware actually encrypts files. So for example, nowadays they're not encrypting the whole file, maybe just a part of it to make it faster. We've also seen ransomware groups experimenting with ciphers. So for example, they would use a symmetric cipher to encrypt the file and an asymmetric one to encrypt the key that encrypted that file, so that only the attacker is able to decrypt that. And probably in the next couple of maybe years, or quite less, we're going to see groups going from traditional cryptography to post-quantum cryptography on that part. Basically, just to put a bit more context behind it, quantum computers are able to break asymmetric encryption, and that would mean that ransomware gangs their encryption wouldn't really work. So a victim could decrypt the files. But with post-quantum cryptography, which means cryptography that's resistant to those attacks, they would basically ensure that it will never be decrypted. And actually, quite recently, NIST has updated the list of recommendations for cryptographic algorithms and chosen, let's say, winner for post-quantum cryptography, and that's probably going to be used in the future.
And that's interesting because in that situation, because like you said, the data might end up the dark web somewhere openly anyway. But are there particular cases or verticals or industries where data made public is not particularly valuable to a wide audience, but the encrypted one is valuable for the organization, period? I can think of a couple, but I think you might know better examples.
Yeah, so by encrypting the data, they basically would ensure that the company can't really function. So for example, you could think of an industry company like manufacturing a set of things. If they get stopped for like a week or two, they have delays in shipping and stuff like that. And they might actually lose more money this way than just having some schematics being online.
Yeah, like I was, thinking maybe like I don't know if this is the best example, but like I don't know, some sort of a unstructured model for a self-driving vehicle that, if leaked in the world, would not be useful to anybody, but the company without it might just not be able to function and lose 10 years of research or something. So there's still a tail of being of an impact there, right?
Yeah.
So yes, that's
What I do need to add here is that more companies started to understand that backup and restore mechanism is required. So more and more of them are starting to adopt this, meaning that when a critical mass of them will actually use a backup solution for their most valuable assets, then these tactics will no longer be as relevant. On the other hand, you might be breached. Your information, if it's being made public, might not matter that much. But there are some scenarios where for you as a company, as a business, it's still not a good thing. So for example, if you're, listed, if you're a listed company, and if you got breached, it's likely that, your share might decrease once this is, even if the data that is presenting there has no actual value for nobody. The fact that you got breached could also impact your
reputation,
your reputation, your share. So there are other, let's say, mechanisms. And my guess here is that this extortion actually targets the image of that company more than the actual business damage. Or in the future, this will be a very important component on the negotiation between
and there's
the
been
ransomware
multiple
gang
companies that did not disclose the fact that they were breached and
Yeah.
exploited, right?
Yeah.
So multiple scenarios. How does it look like or where would you rank it in the SOC? Where would you rank ransomware in terms of, immediacy and importance?
It's one thing, it's been on the uptick, and one of the things that's been surprising is the speed of the attacks. So a lot of times, I know we've talked about this in another episode about the incident response piece and having responsive customers, and sometimes those minutes to hours can make a huge difference on the point of the initial access, the initial reconnaissance, and the different moves they're making to get established. If we're catching them early on and we can shut that down, we've already taken away their encryption ability and everything else. But if they've progressed and gotten to the point where they're starting to make some other moves, it's like, if you're not responding, it's it's too late. So it's the speed of the attacks is very much incumbent on that communications piece with.
We're talking hours, right? We're not talking days or anything.
Yeah, it could be, and sometimes even minutes. We've seen that happen where it's escalated so far because it came from an unmonitored segment of the network, or device that didn't have an agent deployed, and we didn't have the visibility for the previous 3 weeks or months. We've seen dwell times where sometimes they can be in the environment for a very long time before they start attacking. So it's like the speed of the attacks is something that's pretty interesting to see on our side.
So what's the general sentiment towards ransomware/extortionware from your side of things? Because the industry as a whole has been somewhat successful, quite actually pretty holding back a lot of the ransomware attacks. We have examples of tragic cases with a great impact, but at the same time, there's been a lot of attacks that were fumbled before they happened. At the same time, there was, decryptors were made available that actually saved a lot of companies' data and money. So I think, cybersecurity professionals, it's not a losing battle, but what's the sentiment today, and how does it seem to be progressing further?
I think there's definitely, it feels like there are definitely companies out there that have kind of like actually just assumed there is going to be a risk and that they are going to get hit, and it's because, when I see a company listed on a ransomware blog, that to me is a company that hasn't paid or they broke the rules. So, and if I'm seeing a lot of companies there, that means that's a lot of companies that aren't paying. And so, does that mean you're kind of like shutting down their operations, or does that mean they're going to go on a bender and start hitting more organizations to make that money?
What's the percentage where the attackers kept their part of the deal, and if being paid, they didn't disclose, they didn't publish openly the data?
It's funny. I've actually seen a couple of times where on a blog, you'll actually see that maybe they had a teaser and then suddenly that post has been deleted. So that, there's also that kind of media relations component that they have where, if I say I'm going to do what I'm going to say and then I do it, that means like, okay, that, if we do pay them, they actually will delete it, or they seem
it's
like
also reputation. They have their own reputation
Yes.
as well. If they actually build a bad rep, like if I know that even if I pay them, they're not going to do anything, then I'm definitely not going to pay them.
Exactly. Yeah.
So from their perspective, having a good rep, like, if you ask, it's like referrals. If you ask them, I breach them and they told me, yeah, they provide me with the decryption key. If you ask them, they provide me with the decryption key. That's a good rep, and it is important for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree with Sean here. If you pay, they are going to try to make sure that you get your decryptor.
Yeah, right. And then looking back at how the whole system works, where you have the groups, which are the smaller high-profile groups that develop the attack, and then the distributors that actually propagate and actually execute the attack. We're of course seeing an increase in at least the distribution side, if not the creation side of the attack. Is there enough room for more?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a numbers game. I know there was one group that was kind of on a bender this year that we saw them a few times in some of the incidents. And, if I have, say, 20 affiliates that I need to pay, and I need to have one successful attack out of 10 to make enough money to make my affiliates happy, make the rest of my business happy. I think that's kind of what they're going for is, if I can get one good one and everybody gets paid and is happy for now, that's a success in my book. But if I can get all 10, that's even better. That's another Lamborghini. So.
And we do need to take into consideration that we're living in an AI age. Building a new ransomware will not take that much time right now. It's actually going to be easier. You can do it faster. And one thing that we actually observed during the last couple of times is that they're kind of switching slowly to let's say programming languages that allow you to build on multiple platforms. So Golang, Rust, and so on. Which, by the way, besides having a really powerful optimization engine that will kind of make it, let's say, more complicated for static scanner to detect them, it's so much easier for them to actually rebuild that for Linux, rebuild that for Mac. So if you have something there, you just need to quickly rebuild it and deploy it. So yeah, in terms of building more, I'm quite convinced that building more ransomware, it's not necessarily a problem. I do believe that, having multiple affiliates and distribution channel, or let's say scale the distribution channel, could be an issue for them. But that's a completely different story. But at least from having a new MAR ready, that I think is more than covered.
So it's an interesting, of course, always an interesting setup to follow how the attack gets designed in one spot and then affiliates distribute, and it's all decentralized. And I was always wondering, maybe more, if the affiliates themselves might go rogue and just go against the whole purpose of the thing or not, or if affiliates play a bigger role as the whole thing grows in the research and discovery phase as well. I've always wondered if there's anything to that.
I can provide some observation, not necessarily. I do believe Sean has maybe another point of view. My understanding on how this entire let's say ecosystem works is that they don't necessarily want to know or to have too many information one about the other. So there are some communication channel on the dark web, but it's not like they know each other. If they meet on the street, they say, hey, how you doing? Remember the ransomware that we put together? So they try to work as completely different entities. Because of this, there were in the past some scenarios. So for example, there was a children's hospital that was targeted, and then the guys that actually built the ransomware freely provided them the decryption key and said, yeah, one of our affiliates, even though we told them you shouldn't target them, still targeted them, but we're going to free provide. We don't want to target a children's hospital. There seems to be some desynchronism between them, which mainly translate that each one of them operate within its own lane, not necessarily as a structured group. Now, I don't know if you have like a different observation.
Yeah, they've been kind of experimenting with different business models. It used to be kind of like if you're an affiliate of one, you're exclusively that, and you couldn't double dip. And I couldn't work for Group A and also Group B. But now it's kind of getting a little more flexible, where some of them are kind of like openly cooperating. There was a kind of like a ransomware cartel idea with a couple of the big ones recently, and so there's all these kind of different ways that they're kind of experimenting with that to try to get more affiliates, or figure out different ways that a loader could be repurposed for ransomware stuff exclusively. There's a lot of kind of behind the scenes product roadmaps, I'm sure, somewhere that the product guy at some ransomware group is working on this stuff, and these are the capabilities we're building for Q2. So it's interesting to think about, but it's it's a business for sure.
Right. And I mean, we all know that ransomware taps into such a big pool of money, and it's such a lucrative business that I'm not even surprised when Radu brought up quantum encryption. And it's ironic, I guess, that a lot of the latest and greatest technologies are being used to weaponize this further. But the reality is that at the end of it, at the bottom of it, it's always the research of a handful of people who understand the vulnerabilities of particular systems that they will attack, whatever 0 days or whatever other avenues, and that's what fuels it all ultimately. And I wonder from the researcher side of things, because it's exactly what you guys are looking at as well. If you feel like there's going to be some advancements or some interesting new discoveries. I'm looking at you, Radu, actually.
Yeah, well, we have seen a few reports and have also tested a lot in the lab with encrypting different types of resources on cloud environments. So, for example, you could, we found ways to actually encrypt virtual machines from outside on AWS, Azure and GCP, and there are probably many more methods to do this, and it's probably going to be a bit more of a bigger problem in the future, because you can't really block it. Nobody's asking you, hey, are you sure that you want to do that, or asking a third party, and B, because companies might start migrating to cloud more and more, a big part of the critical infrastructures is already there. So,
but obviously the industry is also catching up and using the latest available technologies to be able to match it. So it sounds like for the time being it's still going to be the same cat and mouse game, where somebody makes a little bit of progress and the industry catches up and makes more progress, and then ransomware slash extortionware is it's here to stay, unfortunately, right?
Yeah, I feel so like this.
I don't want to leave it on a negative note. It's not a defeatist situation. However, it's interesting that it's probably become the main.
Look, there are it's too much money within this industry for them, just to say, well, it worked while it worked. I'm going to, start a small shop, sell some bread or pastry, something there. This is it. It's a lot of money there. And, believe it or not, some of the regulations that are there it's kind of helping them. So, just think about GDPR. It's Well, for you as a company, it's if you got hit by the GDPR law and you, I don't know, mess something with your customers' data, you have to pay a lot of money. And it's not from within your profit, it's from you within everything that you earn within 1 year. So, from a different perspective, this actually opens an opportunity for you. So, if you manage to push a company to that point, they will most likely pay the money. Yeah, maybe it's not going to be the same model, maybe, and some things will change, but the actual fact that they are going to try to actually take some money will remain. And to be frank, I think the only possible way that will actually stop this is if the entire cryptocurrency system disappears. If there isn't any way for you to pay them, and the payment will not be discovered or cannot be monitored, that will be the actual stop of a ransomware. Otherwise, they will always find some way around it, because the concept here is that I'm going to force you somehow to pay me some money, because right now I have a mechanism so that nobody can track that money. While that mechanism is still in place, I can find another way to do this, because the ultimate point that makes me win some money, it's still there.
Right.
It's nothing I can.
So ultimately, it's potentially compliance, a little bit more regulation, potentially both on compliance side, where the fact that GDPR exists should not end up helping.
I'm not saying GDPR is bad, by
Exactly,
the way.
yeah.
GDPR, it's a good thing, but
one
they
of the
can
side
use it.
effects
One of the side effects
is that,
yeah.
And like you said, if the fine for being in breach of the GDPR laws is higher than the ransom, then it kind of defeats some of the purpose as well. But at the same time, some sort of regulation or evolution of the cryptocurrencies that enable the attacks further. I know there's so many more things that we could talk about on this side of the story. We'll definitely keep working around these types of attacks, and potentially next time we talk about it, we won't even call it ransomware anymore. It's going to be extortionware, like you said. So I want to leave it at that. I want to thank you one more time for bringing the latest on this and educating us on how these things are evolving and changing our industry. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for making it to Cybercrime from the Frontline. With this, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.